Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another online talk with the Oxford Guild, with our Collegium Global Network and our partner societies from leading universities. Today, we're joined by Joshua Wong, a Hong Kong pro-democracy activist and campaigns leader who first rose to international prominence as a leader of the Umbrella Movement during the 2014 Hong Kong protests, aged just 17. He served as Secretary General and founder of the pro-democracy party Demosistō, and it was until it was recently disbanded following the implementation of the Hong Kong national security law on the 30th of June 2020. He played a major role in persuading US politicians to pass the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act during the 2019-20 Hong Kong protests, and has been repeatedly disqualified as a political candidate, detained and even imprisoned. He was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in 2017 and for Time Person of the Year in 2014, where he came third in the Readers' poll. Among several other awards and mainstream media coverage, he has currently been released on bail with a travel ban ahead of a fast approaching court date. Today, he'll be discussing some very topical issues around the future of Hong Kong, democracy, China, activism, and much more, as well as answering your questions. Thank you, Joshua, for taking the time to join us and to speak to our audience. And over to you, the floor's yours.
Okay. Thank you for the invitation and good afternoon. I should start by telling how grateful I am to your interest in spending precious time this Sunday afternoon for Hong Kong. As you all know, the protest last year in 2019, which has inspired activist movement across the world, including the United States, Belarus, Thailand, mostly in Poland, continue to bring dynamic change to the politics in Hong Kong as well as China. Yet today, what I'd like to share with you perhaps is not something of great political ideals, apart from my own recount of activism. It would also worth mentioning some behind the scene of the complicated phases of Hong Kong democracy movement at present. I believe this is the right thing to do before returning to prison for the third time soon. And I would like to share some of my insight of the bleak future of Hong Kong Gen Z under national security law. If you had read my book on free speech, you will know that I belong to the last cohort of millennials. I was born in 1996, the year before Hong Kong transferred sovereignty from UK to China. But at the age of 24 today, I'm humbled by the fact that many arrested protesters are far younger than me and you. As of today, more than 10,000 Hong Kongers are arrested since the protests broke out in 2019 summer. More than 100 of them are already physically locked up in prison. Among of the 2,300 protesters who are prosecuted, 700 of them may be sentenced up to 10 years because of the charge of rioting. Putting these figures into context, I just want to tell you what life is like as a youngster today in Hong Kong. What is thought to be normal university life is completely out of the question, because very likely a friend of you, a classmate who share tutorial notes with you, or a roommate cook your lunch today will be thrown to jail on the next day. The situation becomes more and more uncertain since the national security law in Hong Kong is implemented. To many dissidents in Hong Kong, one of the immediate effects of national security law is having yourself forced to accept hostile strangers walking into your life. As for myself, I've been under state surveillance and harassment daily since June. In most of the cases, they wait outside my office or meeting place and took photos when I lived from one place to another. Most insane and ironic situation. I was once tracked by 4 cars through the day, and then the crackdown went further. I was arrested 3 times since the protest in last year. I was banned from election, and the election itself was cancelled later. My books were not allowed in public libraries. They are words we can no longer speak of. However, some people affected by this law are less fortunate. They are forced to leave their home. My friend Levenor, who was the youngest ever lawmaker in Hong Kong history, went exiled in London. For what was used to be advocate can become a crime of present days. A few days ago, one student activist was charged with secession under this law. Worst of all, 12 Hong Kongers, all involved in the protest last year, were seized by China Coastal Guard when fleeing to Taiwan for political asylum in late August. All of them are detained in mainland China, with the youngest age of 16. So I would say that this challenge forced us to reflect on our ideal to freedom and democracy. At night, when we all return to our home, we may question ourselves, how can we continue when almost every means of protest is blocked? Or we might fear, what if police storm into my home and arrest me at dawn tomorrow? But they are also the reason we have to continue our struggle because we don't want our beloved ones to suffer. Despite this obstacle, support of this movement is undiminished. There are many beautiful parts in the protest that continue to be recognized, that the way we contribute to the city, instead of making money on our own in the so-called global financial center. In particular, it's the more mutual trust among protesters that I cherish the most. Certainly, protesters always have different tactical viewpoints, but in a leaderless movement without specific commanders, there are some principles guiding protester decision-making. To name a few: to achieve the 5 demands, to prevent causality, to avoid being arrested, and to achieve mass support. These principles are essential as we suffer a lot notorious police brutality, especially during the 2 battles in university last November. Bearing in mind this higher principle, protesters find it easier to reach consensus during protests or organizing different campaigns. Even if a consensus cannot be reached, people are tolerant of each other and respect fellow protesters' choice. And when protesters are arrested, people offer help and assistance wholeheartedly. We sit in court hearing even we don't know each other, and do frequent prison visits and write letters to protesters in detention. In major festivals and holidays, people gather outside the prison and voice out the slogan so that they won't feel alone and disconnected. This is the most touching part to me, for I also experienced the time and life in jail. The cohesion, the connection, and bonding among protesters are the cornerstone to the movement. At the same time, this kind of process and campaign gave so much empowerment to the mass public who might not be able to fight bravely in the escalating street clash. These scenes are not able to be captured by cameras, but I'm sure it is some of the most important part of Hong Kong movement that I hope the world will remember. And after turning to 2020, while the world is busy fighting with the pandemic, our government in Hong Kong took advantage of the virus to exert a tighter grip over our freedom. We had few and new constraints and restrictions. Public assemblies were banned, but we also rise to the fact that it's time to liberate our imagination. Taking to the street is not the only way of demonstrating people's voice. With the people's resolute spirit and creativity, we can always achieve more than what you could have thought. For instance, there has been a virtual protest through the popular Nintendo Switch game, Animal Crossing. Hong Kong game players organized the protest half a year ago in Animal Crossing, which results in the game being banned in mainland China. Also, Twitter helped to create significant online mobilization in Hong Kong. We even developed daily assignment for protesters and democratic supporters to participate on this frontier. Each day when you wake up, we have got a list of essential tweets for reaction and retweet so that protest-related tweets can be boosted into hot topics in Twitter. This kind of online mobilization happened since last summer, can exert even greater power against Beijing state propaganda and those misleading fake news. In the recent protests in Thailand, this tactics is proven successful. Despite all kinds of suppression, resistance can always find its way out. So, after briefly explaining about our tactics and the situation in Hong Kong, I wish to emphasize the reason for optimism. People might be always curious why we don't feel downhearted or being defeated. I think one of the critical points is about the global rise of Generation Z in the fight of human rights. The past 8 years of my activism since the age of 15 can be summed up into 2 protocols. Firstly, I believe hope can only exist when we insist on dreaming and fighting for it. Secondly, actions are and will always be a solution to an era in crisis. I mentioned Thailand as an encouraging example because we are facing similar struggle and challenge. Most importantly, there are a lot of Generation Z activists rise in the fight for democracy, no matter in Hong Kong or Thailand. I'm sure what we are fighting for is very simple: freedom, genuine equality, check and balance of the authorities. If great cities, just like London, New York, and etc., they could allow their citizens to elect their mayor, so why can't Hong Kong? The only demand for Hong Kongers is to have a vote to elect our government. What makes this demand so difficult is the reluctance of the communist authorities to change the power order in favor of them. But these are always reasons for optimism, even under crackdown and hardline suppression. If you are aware of the hashtag of Milk Alliance from Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Thailand, you will see that together we are making some very beautiful synergy. There's a greater force emerging to fend off all forms of authoritarianism from Beijing, from virtual to reality, from online to offline. Having said that, I'm convinced that the fight for democracy is not restricted in Asia. Even in places with democracy, this fight would need to carry on. Because threats are found in many democratic countries, which are more prone to giving into authoritarianism by way of trade and business deal. Always, human rights might be ignored and override by the commercial interests. There are at times some business leaders questioning why we must push for freedom in Hong Kong. I just want to tell those upper-class elites, we can't enjoy the economic freedom of Hong Kong without the freedom of speech and free flow of information and a well-functioning legal system supported by democracy. It's the high time this value were acknowledged and should be acknowledged. And we hope the world continues to speak up when our voices are brutally silenced. So no doubt there is terrible price to pay in criticizing Beijing and Hong Kong government. As the one who have been arrested for 10 times, being jailed for 3 times, and still have 3 court cases and 6 charges need to face in the upcoming few months. Perhaps the time for me to enjoy freedom is already running out. Although I remain free for the time being, court trials are still scheduled one after one, and it's highly likely that I am returning to prison soon around the end of this year. That's why I cherish every opportunity to share and exchange ideas with all of you guys. I will be facing a maximum of 5 years in jail for unauthorized assembly and up to 1 ridiculous year for wearing a mask in protest. But I'm not deterred whenever I think of fellow protesters who are struggling in detention in Hong Kong or China. Prison bars would never stop me from activism. I only wish that you can continue to stand with people of Hong Kong by following closely to the development, no matter regarding the 12 detained activists in China or state target like myself. To defy the greatest human rights abuser is the essential way to restore democracy of our generation and the generation following us. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Joshua. It's great overview there. Obviously, as you can imagine, lots and lots of questions coming in from our audience. Good one to start with is a question coming from Jack, who's reading PP at Oxford. And Jack has asked, do you feel that the British government was insufficient in the support that it gave for the protest movements in Hong Kong? What would you like to see from
Providing
them?
lifeboats for Hong Kongers is a good move to send a clear signal how the Western world, especially UK as the one who signed in the Sino-British Joint Declaration, should not keep silence when Hong Kong people are suffering in this humanitarian crisis. But I would say that actions speak louder than words. And apart from the lifeboat arrangement, which is more and more important for countries just like UK and other countries belongs to the Western world to reflect and reveal their foreign policy. When China used the Belt and Road Initiative to expand its authoritarian ideology, and the wolf warrior diplomacy already become the common tactics for them to silence the voice of not only Hong Kongers, but also foreigners around the world. I think it's time for the world to reflect that apart from engagement, is there any way out to hold the accountability of China?
Okay, question from Ian, who's reading law at the LSE. And Ian has asked, will Hong Kong being further integrated into China damage its ability to act as a global city? The recent success of Hong Kong IPOs this year suggests otherwise, or is it in spite of things?
First, I would like to comment on the Hong Kong economic system and how the market mechanism work. I guess 2 or 3 decades ago, we always recognized Hong Kong as the Asia financial center or the global city, which emphasizing the uniqueness of Hong Kong with its stock market development and etc. And no matter with the IPO or the stock market development in the recent few years, since Xi Jinping took leadership, it seems that the IPO or the stock market discussion in Hong Kong mainly rely on the red capital development, which already implying that the uniqueness of Hong Kong is being eroded, and how the uniqueness of Hong Kong might be overridden by the interest or the demand of China. So I think when China enhancing its intention to co-opt and also combine or integrated Hong Kong into part of the mainland China system, it will just generate more disadvantage to the world. That's why I think no matter the national secretary implemented, it already eroded the free flow of information, press freedom, and etc. I think how the world should deal with Hong Kong being integrated into China, I think that's also the matter that not only about activists or street protesters, just like we need to care about, no matter politicians, world leaders, or business sector elites, they should also care about when Hong Kong is not Hong Kong anymore. So how could the business market continue the operation? Or it's possible for business sector leaders also send a clear message to Beijing, that's not the way out.
Okay, question here about the upcoming US election, of course, big issue at the moment. Coming from Aliyah, who's doing natural sciences at Cambridge. And Aliyah's asked, do you think that Donald Trump or Joe Biden would be more effective at guarding rights to free speech in China?
I always emphasizing that supporting Hong Kong or China or not is not about the matter of left or right. It's about the matter of right or wrong. And that's why in the previous day, when we traveled to Washington, participated congressional hearing and pushed forward some of our advocacy, we're always emphasizing the importance to have bipartisan consensus. Of course, in the previous 4 years for the Trump administration, it put more and more focus on Hong Kong and put Hong Kong under the global spotlight more than the Obama administration. But in the upcoming 4 years, how will be the new administration to reveal its foreign policy towards Hong Kong and China? I think one of the most important issues is, apart from pushing forward China democratization or sending clear warning signal to the human rights abuser in China, how to separate it and also recognizing the government or the administration should have its complete idea or the roadmap to deal with the foreign policy towards Hong Kong, which is really important. Because I remember no matter 1 or 2 decades ago, when Western governments discuss about the foreign policy towards Hong Kong, always it will just be integrated into part of China. But later on, when we recognizing the unique status and the political or economic position of Hong Kong, I think the world or different country foreign policy towards Hong Kong might be more being recognized and separate it and not using the same model to deal with China to deal with Hong Kong.
Okay, question about the social credit scheme from Natasha, who's doing maths at Harvard. And she's asked, do you agree that the social credit scheme in China has the capability to better order and help Chinese society? Many have been calling for it for a long time.
For the social credit system, it's just putting the idea of how to having the hardline control in Xinjiang and Tibet to other places in mainland China. That's why in the previous days, since the protest last year, we always emphasize that yesterday Xinjiang, today Hong Kong, tomorrow Taiwan. And I see no idea that how the social credit system or the social credit scheme could be used to enhancing the order or help provide any kind of positive impact to the Chinese society. I think more we experiencing in Hong Kong is how Beijing authorities wish to apply the social credit system from China to Hong Kong, and which is totally insane and we're just reducing the freedom that enjoy the Hong Kong people. And all we know that about the state surveillance or the privacy issue is not only discussing in China, even in the Western world, no matter Facebook, Google, Twitter, about their internet information censorship, or about how the privacy issue or how the privacy of the user in social media is being ignored or eroded. I think those matter is always important. That's why I think this kind of social credit scheme might not be beneficial to the world future development, no matter in authoritarian country just like China, or even in country of democracy just like US.
A question about the broader Hong Kong protest movement from Vikram. Vikram's reading engineering at Imperial. Vikram has asked, why do you think the protest movement in Hong Kong failed? What lessons should the world learn from them?
I don't agree the protest movement in Hong Kong failed. In the world, we might have lots of protests in different countries, and even have protests that more than 1 million people took to the street. But in Hong Kong, such a city with only 7 million population, and we could mobilize 2 million Hong Kongers took to the street within the same day and to voice out our demand. I think with the ratio 2 out of 7 million people join our rally, which already implying the power of people and also showing that kowtow to China is not the only way out. In the previous 2 or 3 decades, or even maybe even earlier, in the era that earlier than I born, always there's lots of Western politicians assume that inviting China enter WTO, engaging with China, this kind of dialogue would result in positive impact or etc. But I think since the protest in Hong Kong last year, it sent a clear signal to the world: kowtow to China is not the way out. Dialogue is not only the option that could solve the political crisis that we're suffering in Hong Kong or also in the world right now. So back to the question, I think the protest movement in Hong Kong didn't fail, and it also emphasizing how Hong Kong people deserve democracy. Of course, if we be target oriented, even until this day, the leader of Hong Kong is still not being directly elected by people. But always, I would say that even we can't achieve our goal in a battle, I still believe that one day we can win in the war. And just like how no one expected the Berlin Wall will fall before 1989, but it finally happened 3 decades ago. That's why I still hope one day Hong Kong people can enjoy democracy. And just like how people in Berlin witnessed the Berlin Wall fall a few decades ago. And I think the lesson should the world learn from, which is related to how we deal with the authoritarian ideology. No matter about the state surveillance, the misleading propaganda or fake news, or how China already transformed it from a developing country to the second largest superpower in the world. So how to hold China accountability is not only about the matter for people live in Hong Kong, Taiwan, or China. It's also about how the world should deal with it. Just imagine, even citizens live in US in last year, they experienced how NBA basketball player was censored by the communist authorities. Even game players in Blizzard faced the suppression because of supporting Hong Kong. And even you are just one of the you are one of the youngster that playing the Nintendo Switch game Animal Crossing. Who can imagine even Animal Crossing, this kind of game for even for kid and youngster that will being censored in mainland China? I think what we experiencing and witnessing in Hong Kong, it already implying that why Hong Kong deserve the world to care about, and also about from the experience in Hong Kong, how to deal with China is the matter that everyone should realize and deal with it.
Okay, question about the Chinese government's motivations, coming from Anna, who's doing human sciences at UCL. And Anna's asked, why do you think that the Chinese government chose now to crack down on Hong Kong? What do they have to gain by accelerating what would have happened years later anyway?
Greater suppression will result in greater resistance. If we be target oriented, the short-term goal is to, in 2019, the short-term goal is to stop the controversial extradition bill to be implemented in Hong Kong. The midterm goal is to stop the police brutality and to stop the massive arrest. And the long-term goal, of course, is to have free election to elect our government. If we be target-oriented, of course, the long-term goal and the midterm goal has not been achieved yet. But on September of last year, first time for Beijing authorities announced that they will stop the implementation of the evil policy of the controversial extradition bill to Hong Kong. It's the first time since Xi Jinping took leadership to rule China and Hong Kong, compromise to protest, social movement, and the resistance of citizens. So I would say that that's already the lesson that we need to learn. So back to the So how to deal with the crackdown in Hong Kong? I think it's also about how when Hong Kong people realizing they deserve democracy and etc., China just realized that they need to stop it. Otherwise, it's not only about the influence in Hong Kong, it will just escalate more and more protests and discontent of the people of Taiwan, the people in mainland China, to against the communist regime.
Okay, brilliant. Question coming from Lo, who's doing history at Edinburgh. And Lo has asked, what would you say to your critics who argue that your activism has actually hindered rather than helped democracy in Hong Kong?
In Hong Kong, we have lots of people to support democracy. If we keep track to follow on some of the survey, in Hong Kong, around 70 or 80% of the citizens stand on the side of pro-democracy, which is the yellow camp, and around 20% of the citizens support Beijing, which belongs to the blue camp, and that's the general ratio. And of course, even for the 80% population in Hong Kong that support democracy, some of them also would have some of the criticism on me and would say that some of my tactics might not be beneficial for the world, for the future development of the protests and also our struggle for democracy. But I would say that it also implies why we recognizing the importance of free speech and free flow of information. For the pro-Beijing camp in Hong Kong, they would just be the Beijing loyalists or the puppet of communist China, never having critical thinking, internal debate, or different kind of discussion. But in Hong Kong, for the pro-democratic camp, even sometimes we may have some of the conflict or different kind of concern about our tactics, we still have our consensus on our goal. So how to maximize our public support, which would be really important. And for my personal experience, I would say that we can't expect everyone in the society 100% will agree on your thoughts or idea or the behavior for you to engage in politics. But instead of expecting to please everyone or to get everyone's support, how to do the right thing, which is more critical when we are suffering in the crackdown.
Okay, question about global China, coming from Kofi, who's doing politics at KCL. Kofi's asked, is China's high level of involvement in the affairs of African nations similar to previous models of British or American imperialism, or is this something new?
I love this question a lot, and that's also the things that I would like to emphasize a lot. Always people would say that Hong Kong or China is not up to the things that people really need to care about. But with the Belt and Road Initiative in Africa, or about the Huawei 5G technology, those state-owned enterprise, and expanding the China's influence in Europe by providing this kind of innovative technology, etc. I think it already implying that how China deserves the world concern about it. And I think for China's high-level involvement in Africa, I think we should have some of the similarity with the model of the imperialism of the Western world in last century. But one thing difference is we live in the digital era with the state surveillance. What I mean is even a foreign scholar in the previous day, if they hope to continue their research and to have different kind of analysis on those imperialism of the Western world in last century, I guess the surveillance scale is far less than what suffered by scholar, think tank, researcher, or politician in the recent years. Because what we experiencing is when China targeted that dissidents, scholar that have some of the critical point of view towards China, more and more trouble will be experienced. So I would say that if I need to use a term to sum up what's the way of China, I think that's the evolution of China state surveillance and also the suppression towards the one who hope to get more idea to have the full picture of this imperialism or the authoritarian ideology expansion.
Okay, question about Taiwan coming from Michelle, who's doing economics at York. Michelle's asked, do you think America should back off from Taiwan? China are likely to invade soon, and this could cause an escalation of tensions. What do you see happening?
I believe the world should stand with Taiwan just like how they stand with Hong Kong in 2019. Especially when we talk about Taiwan, always we realizing how China or Beijing authorities wish to implement it, the one country, two system model in Hong Kong, copy it or apply it from Hong Kong to Taiwan. But with our protests in 2019, we already let the world to witness that one country, two system is transformed to one country, one system. And that's not the way out. And this one country, two system model or one country, one system model should not be applied to Taiwan. It will just erode the democratic system or the legal system of Taiwan and to ignore the uniqueness of Taiwan being the only Chinese society that enjoy higher degree of freedom of speech and freedom of press and etc. So I think in the upcoming future, how China deal with Taiwan is really matter, and how should the world stand with Taiwan to deal with the threat or to deal with the military threat of Beijing towards Taiwan, and also deal with it. I think that's also the point that we need aware of.
Okay, question about the new Cold War from Osman, who's doing an MBA at Stanford. Osman asks, does a new Cold War with China benefit anyone?
There's some of the researcher or scholars since 2 or 3 years ago describing that how we are suffering in a new Cold War between China and US, and Hong Kong seems to be the new Berlin, no matter the new East Berlin or the new West Berlin. But always we have this kind of new framework being raised by some of the scholars. Even some of the colleague or friends might have different kind of hesitation with this kind of narrative of the new Cold War. But I would say that this is also the framework that educate and remind us to be more aware on the sharp power expansion of China. And from my point of view, I think the new Cold War, if the world keeps silence on it, it would just beneficial China. Otherwise, I think if the world could react on it and also join into the allies to uphold democracy, freedom, and the universal value that we cherish, I think it will finally beneficial for the one believe in this universal value instead of China.
Question from Sue doing law at UCL. Sue's asked, what is the political roadmap for Hong Kong to flourish economically? if it were to be independent?
For the economic development in Hong Kong, I think no matter under the rule of UK or under the rule of China, no matter 3 or 4 decades ago, or even before President Xi Jinping took the leadership, always the world, no matter belong to which camp or etc., will have the positive impression on Hong Kong's economic development. But I would say that for the roadmap for Hong Kong's economic policy or etc., always I wish to reduce the reliance on China, because in the previous day we always recognizing Hong Kong is the global financial center or the one of the leading city of the Asia financial market. So what's wrong since Xi Jinping took over the leadership? Just hope to integrate Hong Kong into the Greater Bay Area and to ignore our uniqueness. And instead of recognizing Hong Kong as part of the Greater Bay Area or Hong Kong is part of China, of course, we admit this fact, but more I wish is to emphasize that Hong Kong belongs to the global community and Hong Kong's people can proud to be a global citizens.
Question about the future of the Hong Kong movement from Emma, who's doing environment, culture, or studying environment, culture and society at the University of Edinburgh. Looking forward, how do you see the movement for freedom for Hong Kong developing, shifting, and surviving in the years leading up to and following 2047?
I love this question a lot because in the previous day, Beijing promised that to let Hong Kongers to enjoy one country, two system with the 50 years unchanged policy, which means Hong Kong people should enjoy a high degree of autonomy from 1997 to 2047 under the framework of one country, two system. But in the previous day, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I mentioned that in the worst scenario in 2047, Beijing could transform that Hong Kong from one country, two system to one country, one system. Unfortunately, since the national security law is implemented, we don't need to wait until 2047 because Hong Kong already suffer in the nightmare of one country, one system. But if you ask what's my prediction on the future, I would need to admit and to be frankly speaking, no one could hold a crystal ball to predict the future. Since 8 or 9 years ago, when I involved in social movement or the protests in Hong Kong, I could not expect the rise of the umbrella movement. Even after the outbreak of the umbrella movement, who can imagine in 2019 we will have this kind of tremendous Hong Kong protest with 2 million people talk to the street and all the things that we have experienced in 2019 is never expected in the previous day. But I would say that fight for the freedom in Hong Kong seems to be kind of surviving battle. And even we have no hope towards the regime, but we still have hope towards people. And I wish in the upcoming future, when we are developing our civil society and to enhance our bargaining power to fight for universal value that we all cherish, one day Hong Kong can still be the place with democracy and freedom that we can determine our own destiny. And as the politician or activist that engaged in the movement in the previous journey, I could continue have my contribution to let Hong Kong be the place that no one need to immigrant or exile to other place anymore.
Okay, question about a potential compromise coming from Davide, who's doing a PhD in psychology at NUI Galway. And Davide has asked, if you could sit at a table with Chinese officers to negotiate about pacifying Hong Kong, what do you think would be a realistic yet successful compromise?
The most realistic and successful idea is to let Hong Kong enjoy free election and democracy under the promise of Sino-British Joint Declaration. Sino-British Joint Declaration is the UN filed document that signed by China and UK, which already emphasized that how Hong Kong people should enjoy high degree autonomy, Hong Kong people ruling Hong Kong, rule of law, and also to have democracy. And now it's Beijing who broke the promise on this UN filed declaration and to continue erode on Hong Kong. And when China continue to erode on Hong Kong, it will just enhance more and more discontent of Taiwanese people. And also result in how for the Western world we have no trust on this sharp power and authoritarianism expansion model. So I think the best way is to let Hong Kong people to enjoy democracy under what they promised in this declaration that filed in United Nations.
Sorry, just a slight technical difficulty there. Second question, or another question, has come through from Renaud, who's doing engineering at Warwick. And Renaud is asking about Carrie Lam. And the question there is Carrie Lam anything more than a Beijing puppet in your view?
Carrie Lam seems to be a loser and not only a Beijing puppet. Because the discontent towards Carrie Lam is not only included or exists in the pro-democratic camp. For people around the world might always assume that only the one who support democracy show that dissatisfaction to Carrie Lam. But according to my understanding, no matter pro-Beijing camp supporters in Hong Kong or how netizens in mainland China using Weibo, both of those group of people also have lots of criticism towards Carrie Lam, and their criticism of this campaign is even not less than the protester belongs to the pro-democratic camp. Because all we know is when 2 million people took to the street on last June, if Carrie Lam decided to withdraw the evil proposal, to withdraw the evil policy immediately, the street protests might de-escalate immediately. And what we saw on last July, August, September, October, November, it might never happen. But Carrie Lam always have the worst political judgment. She might be the experienced civil servant to receive order from Beijing and also to conduct some of the tasks from her boss. But when she becomes or being recognized as the politician, she never know how to solve the political crisis. And all we know is political crisis must solve by political system reform. When Carrie Lam refused to have any kind of compromise and to escalate the tension, I believe even for pro-Beijing camp also have lots of discontent and urge Carrie Lam to step down. Is not only the idea of pro-democratic camp, even the one who love Beijing a lot or loyal to the communist regime would also wish Carrie Lam to step down.
Okay, question about a comparison that's been made quite a lot in the West, coming from Gina, who's doing an MPP at McGill, or who's reading MPP at McGill. The question is, are comparisons that have been made between China in the 2010s and Germany in the 1930s by critics of China unreasonable?
I think which is really important and a good framework to compare China in the 2010 and also Germany in 1930 in last century. Because when the power of China is expanding, how it show no respect on the liberal value and international order might be more easy to be observed, and no excuse could be provided by China. 2 or 3 decades ago, especially before China entered the WTO, or at least maybe within the first 10 years that China entered WTO, there's always some of the false hope from the Western community. We need to give more time for China. We should not be too harsh to the leader in China because it needs times and etc. But when China already transformed it to the second largest superpower, how can they still provide an excuse or the narrative that they provided 4 decades ago? That's not 1980s already, that's 2010. So I would say that when China show no respect on liberal value, I think which is similar with the leaders in Germany and the struggle or the internal conflict of Germany in 1930s. So I think for those critics of China, it seems that it's more should be recognized, and also more and more critics on the engagement policy towards China is more reasonable and easy to understand.
Okay, question about what democracy would look like in Hong Kong from Alex, who's doing PPE at Oxford. And Alex has asked, do you think existing democratic systems run by countries such as America or the UK would work in Hong Kong? If not, what new structure or system should be adopted?
I believe the existing democratic system that run by America or the UK would work in Hong Kong, and also far more and more better than the system that experiencing by Hong Kong right now. But of course, it can work. Doesn't mean it will be well performed or have well functioned. And with what we experience of the retreat of democracy or some of the conflict of the populism movement or the discussion about far right or far left or etc. Always the democratic system, even in the Western world, should have more review, reflect, and also have the evolution on it. But I would say that it would work, but not being well performed. But it democratic system can work in Hong Kong absolutely with far more better than the humanitarian crisis experiencing by Hong Kong people. Of course, for a lot of scholars or people study in West university in US or UK would have the intention to have this kind of discussion. I would say that in the academic approach or academic aspect, it would be good to have the discussion. But for Hong Kong people, when I realized how 11 years old kid was arrested during the protest, and 84 years old elderly, even older than my grandpa and grandma, were both arrested during the rally under the riot police crackdown. Or even 15 years old student in Hong Kong, younger than me, was prosecuted with the riot charges, might result in 10 years in prison. 16 years old schoolboy was fired by live round during protests and sent to hospital immediately, and almost died because of the police brutality. This kind of discussion seems to be a bit out of the daily experience or the actual context of the political struggle right now in Hong Kong. I wish democratic system could work in Hong Kong, but of course, if we wish to have the well-performed system, it's not the existing system in the Western world right now. Always we need to have more progress and improvement.
Okay, question or further question about the Belt and Road Initiative from Noah, who's doing an MBA at INSEAD. And Noah has asked, is the Belt and Road Initiative a danger to the world in your view? Is there anything positive you think that can come from it, or is it a huge risk for many nations?
The only positive impact of Belt and Road Initiative is to let the world to realize the threats of China. In the previous day, when we talk about how China broke the promise of the Sino-British Joint Declaration, country around the world or people's journalists or politicians will say that okay, even China broke the promise in this declaration. What is matter to me, or why I need to care about it? And when the Belt and Road Initiative exists, we will say that how Beijing broke the promise in the Joint Declaration in 1984 might be same as how Beijing broke the promise in the Belt and Road Initiative. And this kind of economic co-optation or economic expansion or this kind of wolf warrior diplomacy is being covered by the sugar coat of the economic benefits. It seems to have been beneficial in the short run, but later on, I think for Greece or for country in Africa, they might already realizing some of the negative impact or some of the uncertain when they deal with China. So I think, of course, after national security law is implemented in Hong Kong, none of the politicians in Hong Kong that live in Hong Kong will call on sanction. But I think it's only the clear message that we wish the world should hold China's accountability, and also how to stop the wolf warrior diplomacy is not only about the matter of Hong Kong people already, it's the matter of the world.
Okay, question about Western involvement in Hong Kong protests, building on previous discussion about this, coming from Olivia, who's doing law at Durham. And Olivia has asked, what do you think is the best thing that people in the West can do to prevent future issues, such as the one in Hong Kong? Or are they powerless in this regard against China's might?
Together, we are the louder voice that could not be silenced. And the threat could not defeat us would make us even stronger determination. And I think always when we feel powerless or hopeless, the only way out for us is to take action, because actions speak louder than words. And instead of having more and more hesitation or concern, how you take action always will result in more and more positive impact, and to empower others and also empower yourself. And I think the best thing that people around the world, not only in the West, but also in Asia or in different places, that they can do is to stand with Hong Kong. Of course, if you come with different country or you have different kind of occupation or position in the society, you can have different kind of contribution. But at least I already experienced lots of the struggle in Hong Kong from the age of 15 to 24, and I wish people could realizing that never underestimate your contribution. For example, at the age of 15, when Beijing decided to introduce the brainwashing propaganda to Hong Kong to a high school student, as a high school student, I started to organize the action, and I could not expect it would result in 100,000 Hong Kongers surrounded the government headquarters in 2012 when I was at the age of 15. But every great change comes with every small step, and never underestimate it, and the tremendous change might lies ahead.
Okay, question about the coronavirus from Olga, who's doing PP at Oxford. And Olga's asked, should China be commended for its capability in controlling COVID, particularly when considering that Britain and other European nations have just returned to national lockdown?
Lots of the journalists asked me that with the outbreak of COVID-19, will it reduce people's attention towards Hong Kong around the world? I would say that, of course, the outbreak of COVID-19 will reduce people's attention on Hong Kong, but it also put the world attention on China, because the COVID-19, the coronavirus, is exported from Wuhan in mainland China to countries all over the world. So I would say that when China is lack of transparency, free flow of information, punishing whistleblower, show no respect on check and balance, and etc., which just result in the coronavirus outbreak around the world, and also generated this crisis, not only in China, Asia, but also to the Western world. So in the post-pandemic era, I wish it would come on early 2021. I believe world leaders and the global community might already ask China to hold accountability. So I think how China show no capacity to control the COVID-19 that come from China. And I believe European country, how could they deal with it, or to put pressure on China, which will be one of the critical points that we look forward to in the future. And of course, for the national lockdown, no one would enjoy to see to experiencing it, or it happen in any country or any places. But later on, how would China respect on it? Or just recognizing WHO as the puppet of China, or when even WHO decided to start the investigation, China even refused to allow the researcher or the delegation from WHO to visit Wuhan. I think those are the issues that really implying China show no respect on the global mechanism.
A question about your upcoming trial from Sam, who's doing history at Cambridge. Sam has asked, how do you feel about your upcoming trial? How do you stay so positive and optimistic when facing such huge personal hardship?
as I've mentioned, I see no hope towards the regime. But I still see hope towards people. Compared to other activists that already being detained and locked up in prison for 5 or 10 years, the price I pay is just a small piece of cake. Of course, which is really exhausted. No matter being traced by unknown private car day by days, or how every day when protester or politician live in Hong Kong, no one could guarantee they could wake up 9 a.m. in the morning, because always in 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. in the morning, police will storm into your home and to arrest you suddenly without a house search warrant. Today, 14 hours ago, 7 lawmakers in Hong Kong were just arrested because police stormed into the home 6 a.m. in the morning and arrest them with the abuse of power. And that's the daily routine in Hong Kong already. But I would say that with the support and the courage of people around the world, it always gives us power to continue our fights in this uphill battle. And as I've mentioned, even we can't achieve victory in a battle, but I still believe we can win in the war.
Okay, question about global protests and the means through which they can best be heard, coming from Jay, who's doing E&M at Oxford. Jay was asked, do you think the protests around the world have become too violent or sowed too much chaos at some points? For example, in the US, looting has harmed the perception of movements such as Black Lives Matter.
Whether the behavior of protester will harm the perception of different movement in different country, I think different country protester might have different consideration. And practically speaking, the tolerance level of people towards the force used by protester might be totally different in different country around the world, and also in different period of time. And I would say that no matter police brutality exists in Hong Kong or United States, it is the responsibility for the government to hold the police accountability. That's why I never blame the victim. And of course, protesters always need to have improvement and also have more self-reflection. But more important is how to solve the political crisis. It always comes with and result in political system reform. If the leaders or the authorities refuse to conduct any kind of reforms, it will just result in more of the clash and the discontent to those leaders. And most important, in Hong Kong, the leader never received the mandate from people, never elected by us, and just handpicked by Beijing.
Okay, question about the future of human rights in Hong Kong, coming from Alex, who's doing law at Columbia. And Alex has asked, what do you see as the future of human rights in Hong Kong? What is the current public confidence in the judicial system, especially regarding the recently arrested students?
Which is hard for us to predict. How will the human rights condition become? How will the degree of the human rights condition become more worsening in the upcoming 5 to 10 years? And I would say that the current general public in Hong Kong currently already realized that rule of law is not exist in Hong Kong. And even we still have the open hearing at the court. Journalists are allowed to attend, and ordinary citizens can participate, or etc. But it doesn't mean that the judicial system will uphold judicial independence and rule of law. And always, the judiciary is the tools being weaponized by the authorities to punish protesters and activists. And for protesters use force during protests, might be jailed for 4 years. But for pro-Beijing supporters use force to attack pro-democratic camp supporters, it might just result in jail for 4 months. So I think that's the double standard, and that's why people already show no trust on the rule of law.
Question from Ryan, who's doing PP at KCL, about the offer the UK has made to Hong Kong citizens. So the UK extended the possibility of citizenship for some people in Hong Kong, but it remains unattainable for many. There has been talk here about building a new Hong Kong in the UK. What are your thoughts?
As I mentioned, the UK extend the possibility of citizenship for people in Hong Kong is a good move, as I mentioned, as a lifeboat. But how to cover or provide assistance for people who were born after 1997, born after the transfer of sovereignty, I believe that is one of the critical point that a lot of MPs or politicians in United Kingdom, they care about Hong Kong, will look forward to figure the way out. And about the question of how to build a new Hong Kong in the UK, I would say that whether Hong Kong exists or not is not about the territories and not also about where it located or exists. It's about whether Hong Kong has existed. And before talking about where should we build a new Hong Kong, I think it's how we could still upholding our sense of belongings to Hong Kong, even people might not believe in Hong Kong as our anymore. That's the challenge that we face, but I believe we can overcome.
Question about Deng Xiaoping from Wendy, who's in classics at Oxford. So Wendy asks, in your view, should Deng Xiaoping be more venerated in China for what he did to open up the country?
Open up the country is the idea raised in last century, and whether should be more venerated. I would say that if the one country two system in Hong Kong follow the model of Deng Xiaoping and Beijing respect the promise of the Joint Declaration, from a more rational assumption, Hong Kong would not suffer in this humanitarian crisis. And whether the leader is Deng Xiaoping, Wu Jintao, or Xi Jinping, I think the situation is totally different. 10 or 20 years ago, maybe 3 decades ago, under the rule of Deng Xiaoping, it's about open up the country to push forward the economic development. During 15 years ago, even under the hardline crackdown, we're still experiencing and observing the development of the civil society finally exists in China. But since Xi Jinping who took the leadership, everything ends immediately. So I think it's not about the era of Deng Xiaoping anymore. It's about how Xi Jinping is not the President Xi only. It's the Emperor Xi who continue hope himself might be another emperor. Hello? Hi.
Hi, sorry, there seems to be some technical difficulties on Harry's end. I'll read one last question from Hannah, who's an A-level student at Leeds. What advice do you have for young people who want to engage more in activism, not just in Hong Kong, but globally? Do you have any key lessons learned you can pass on?
Apart from dedicating to your cause at home, do take time and put more attention to the activism around the world, in Belarus, Thailand, France, and etc. While we might differ a bit in our demands or the complicated power relationship among different actors, I believe that knowing about the world is also a significant empowerment to your activism, because there are always things to learn from each other, just like how we stand with those dissidents around the world.
Actually, we have a few more questions that are just coming in. So I'll read one by Edward, who does modern languages at Bristol. Do you think that the 20% or so who support Beijing in Hong Kong have been ignored by your movement?
I never believed that they were ignored by our movement, because apart from 70% of us belongs to the pro-democratic camp, 20% of them belongs to pro-Beijing camp, and 10% of them stay moderate or still have not taken stand yet. I believe that when we put more effort to have more education and promotion and explanation, finally we can turn more of them stand on our side. Before the 2019 summer protest, less than 60% of Hong Kongers stand on the side of protesters. But since the protest happened, it's just educated and empower more people that never care about politics stand on the side of protester. Just recall the election result on last November. 85% of the seat in the district council won by pro-democratic camp, and this is the landslide victory that we never experienced in the previous day. So I'm optimistic that even we can't change the mindset of those upper class leaders, we can't change the mindset of Carrie Lam or Xi Jinping, but we can enhance more and more people stand on our side.
All right, now we have a question coming in from Emma, who does law at Oxford. To what extent do you think the judiciary are complicit in what is happening in Hong Kong? And are they being left with no choice by the Hong Kong government but to convict protesters?
I disagree. Those judges left no choice by the Hong Kong government. And finally, the only option for them is to convict protesters. In the previous year, more than 2,000 Hong Kongers were prosecuted. I was among one of them. And some of the judge in the court finally choose not to convict protester. They choose not to lock protester up into prison. Of course, finally, some of the judge face some of the pressure or complaint from the pro-Beijing camp. But in Hong Kong, the context, of course, is really worse, but it's still really different with the judicial system in mainland China. And I believe whether those judiciary still have the freedom to make the decision is exists or not, it depends on themselves. And instead of only blame on the system, how every actors or every individuals inside the society to recognize those values that they should uphold, or how to be the one that choose not to kowtow to the chilling effect, which is always the challenge that we suffering in the struggle.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, sorry about that. Connection just dropped there for me. We thought we'd do this as quite a good last question coming from Ben, who's reading history at Yale. And Ben has asked, thank you for such an interesting talk. What are the key things people outside Hong Kong can do to help? Are you still hopeful for the future in spite of the recent trends?
I still have hope in spite of the recent trend, and I wish people around the world, especially watching this Facebook or this YouTube live, could continue to put your attention to Hong Kong. No matter follow me or other Hong Kongers on Twitter, read the news related to Hong Kong, join our #SaveTrelf campaign, or different kind of the online mobilization, which we always welcome people around the world to support us. Because support Hong Kong or not is not only a matter for Hong Kongers, it's also the matter for the world. And we believe in this difficult timing, when Hong Kong people stand in the forefront to confront the largest authoritarian regime in the world, we wish to inspire and impress more people to stand on our side.
Thank you so much for that, Joshua. That was brilliant, and thank you for addressing our audience and for answering their questions. Thank you so much to everyone for coming and for watching, and for all of your varied and very interesting questions. We look forward to welcoming you all again soon at our upcoming events. Thank you very much, and goodbye, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. And feel free to follow me on Twitter, or if you guys have any question, it would be great to send me email directly. And my email is listed on my Twitter bio already. Thank you. Bye-bye.